Protecting the unborn. The Trump administration unveils an updated list of priorities for the 2020 presidential campaign. We're at the White House. Primary elections. A look at the historic night in the state of Massachusetts. Denied entry. We hear from an archbishop from Belarus who has been denied the chance to return to the country. And message of hope. Pope Francis says the world may emerge stronger following the coronavirus pandemic. We'll explain. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sable. Well, the Trump campaign has added unborn life to a new list of second-term priorities. The list also contains defending religious freedom. The Trump campaign includes the commitment under a banner called Defend American Values. Let's check in with White House correspondent Owen Jensen. Owen.
Eric, with Election Day just 2 months from tomorrow, pro-life protections have been spelled out for all to see. Pro-life advocates like Live Action's Lila Rose made an online push for President Donald Trump's campaign to expand its agenda. She tweeted, out of Team Trump's 50 core priorities and goals, why isn't a single one the protection of preborn children?
So I'm very glad to see that they have updated this to include preborn lives, because this is the greatest human rights abuse of our time. No other right matters, right, if you don't have the right to life.
Recently, the Trump campaign added Defend American Values to its list of second-term agenda goals. Specific points include continue nominating constitutionalist Supreme Court and lower court judges, protect unborn life through every means available, and defend the freedoms of religious believers and organizations.
The pro-life movement needs the assurance that if this second term is to happen, that they will do what needs to be done. And we would say it needs to be done now, which is defunding Planned Parenthood of all their taxpayer dollars.
President Trump highlighted his goals during last week's Republican nomination acceptance speech.
Tonight, we proudly declare that all children, born and unborn, have a God-given right to life.
Meanwhile, the president is also pushing back against his rival, Joe Biden, releasing political ads in swing states like Wisconsin.
Biden and the radical left's weak response has led to chaos and violence, and their calls for defunding police would make it worse.
And today, the president traveling again, this time making an appearance in North Carolina to recognize Wilmington's contribution to World War II, which ended 75 years ago today.
Together, we will remember America's towering victories. We will recognize America's outstanding virtues, and we will pay tribute to the heroes who keep us safe, strong, proud, and free.
North Carolina, of course, is a key battleground state. Tomorrow, Vice President Mike Pence will be there, and on Friday, absentee ballots go out to voters in that state. Eric?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting tonight. Thanks, Owen. Well, Jeannie Mancini, president of March for Life, joins me now on Skype. Jeannie, welcome back. Now, what's your reaction to this addition to protecting the unborn in the administration's list of second-term priorities?
Well, thanks, Eric. We're delighted to see that. I just happen to wonder if it was a mistake at the staff level that it wasn't originally included. I mean, this has been such an important issue for President Trump. And certainly we saw it well reflected in the convention last week, as Owen just reported, with speakers like Abby Johnson and Sister Colonel Dr. Byrne, Nick Sandman, and of course, even the president and vice president themselves in their comments. So we know that this is a critical issue for this administration, and we've seen him keep his promises in the last 4 years. And so we would expect that in the next administration as well.
Exactly. Some are questioning why this wasn't on the original list, correct?
They are questioning it. To me, I just wonder if it was a staff mistake, because it seems to me that once it was brought to the attention of the president, it was changed immediately, and I'm happy about that.
Well, President Trump, of course, was the first sitting president to attend the March for Life in person. What action more would you like to see the president take protecting the unborn if reelected?
Yeah, and I'll just give a quick little snippet from that experience of having him come to the March for Life in person. It was so special. And much to my surprise, the next day he picked up the phone and called me to talk about what a special experience it was. I wasn't expecting it. His staffers didn't, let me know ahead of time. He just wanted to talk about how great the young people were, the energy of the pro-lifers, and how this is such a critical issue for this election. So I just want to let your viewers know that he is 100% behind this, and that's been my own experience with him. What more would we want? For him to be faithful to his promises, promises made, promises kept. That's what he's running on, and that's what we've seen in these last 4 years. He's courageous. He's not a career politician. He leans into these issues. So like Allison from Live Action just said, defunding Planned Parenthood, protecting the Hyde Amendment. We heard Speaker Pelosi come out with some terrible remarks about the popular bipartisan Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer funding of abortion, doing things like preserving ethical experimentation, especially right now with these vaccines for coronavirus, making sure that we're not using embryonic stem cells, in that kind of experimentation, etc. So these kinds of things we can see the president leaning into in a second term.
Well, I tell you, a lot of us are looking forward to next week's virtual theme reveal of the 2021 March for Life. But can you give us any insight on that?
I would highly recommend that your viewers tune in to that. It's going to be really interesting. And I think that we always try to pick a theme that the culture needs for a particular moment. We really try to discern the theme well. And I think that that's very true this year. And just the webinar itself is like this, beautiful variety of high-level pro-life speakers, from Lila Rose to Dr. Christina Francis to Dr. Reverend Alveda King and more and more and more. And it's just going to be really fun. David B. Wright and I are co-emceeing, and tomorrow morning we're going to be working through some of our responsibilities as MCs. So we're really excited for this.
Well, I tried. I had to try. But tell me more about what you would like to see about protecting life issues out there. Anything more?
Gosh, I think the most important thing that I could encourage your viewers to do, because so often we think this is for the politicians, is to know that every action that we take, whether it's a little sacrifice or a prayer, maybe the most powerful actions are sacrifices and prayers, but voting, of course, writing op-eds, running for school office, all of these different kinds of things help us to build a culture of life. So don't ever be discouraged. Know that every single one of those actions matters. And, we keep hearing it, but folks, we are in a historic moment right now where the dignity of the human person is, being attacked in so many different ways. And so we need everyone to get out there and just to do their best in terms of building a culture of life in these moments.
Well, Jeannie Mancini, president of March for Life, thank you for your insights.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
In other news, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden announces he plans to visit Kenosha, Wisconsin tomorrow. The trip will mark the former vice president's first visit to the battleground state this year. President Donald Trump visited Kenosha yesterday. He promised more federal resources for police and small businesses destroyed in the riots. That followed the police shooting of Jacob Blake. The president blamed, quote, domestic terror for the violence in the community that has caused an estimated $2 million in damage. Let's check in with Philip Crowler, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Philip, welcome back. Now, I want to talk to you about Joe Biden's expected visit in just a moment, but first, let's start with President Trump's visit yesterday. You're there in Kenosha right now, where city and state officials discouraged the president from coming. What's the mood like there?
Well, the truth is that this is a city that's a little bit tired of being the center of attention, not just the visit from one candidate yesterday, but with the former Vice President Joe Biden coming tomorrow. This is not necessarily what people want here, generally speaking. You can see the scene behind me. This is still something that shocks the inhabitants of Kenosha who haven't seen these scenes of destruction yet. 30 buildings altogether were burned to the ground during the 3 first nights of rioting. There are still people from the city itself and from the surrounding county who come here to see this for themselves and can't quite believe what happened here. As for the president's visit, he probably will be happy with what he saw. Supporters were out in the street to greet the motorcade, though there was no direct contact between the president and and his supporters, maybe because actually in this city of Kenosha there were plenty of opponents of his and protesters among those crowds, something that we actually see relatively rarely when the president is out on the road. He tends to go only to places that are very favorable to him. That is not the case here in the city of Kenosha. So he was faced with quite a few boos at the same time that he might have heard a bit of cheering.
And Philip, we're learning today that the Trump 2020 campaign is launching new television ads in Wisconsin. What specifically do they focus on?
Well, essentially what they do is they try to link the former vice president and Democratic nominee with the riots that happened not only here in Kenosha last week, but also in the likes of Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd. Of course, there is no clear connection between the two, but the criticism from the Trump campaign is that the far left, if you will, of the Democratic Party and the former vice president have not done enough to stop, or to discourage rather, protesters who turned into rioters in a place like Kenosha. Now what we are seeing though, because you mentioned that this was an ad buy in Wisconsin, there is one also happening in Minnesota at the very same time. These are early voting states. These are also states that the Trump campaign believes are absolutely key to potentially winning in November. Now, Minnesota doesn't tend to go for a Republican, but Wisconsin, you might remember, you will remember, of course, went by a very small margin for Donald Trump in 2016. He wants to make sure of that and is getting those ads out as quickly as possible. What we're seeing here is a campaign really ratcheting up here. The visit from the president wasn't a campaign visit officially yesterday. Biden's is, but they look so different to what you'd usually expect from a presidential election campaign. There are no big crowds. They're not speaking to particularly big crowds. All of this, of course, because of the coronavirus outbreak. Things just feel very different this time around.
Well, they certainly do for all of us. Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press, thank you. Well, Senator Edward Markey has won last night's hard-fought Massachusetts Democratic primary.
The time to be timid is past. The age of incrementalism is over. Now is our moment to think big, to build big, to be big. This is what this election is all about.
Massachusetts Congressman Joe Kennedy tried unsuccessfully to unseat Markey, the first time a member of the Kennedy family has lost a run for Congress in Massachusetts. Another Massachusetts incumbent, Richard Neal, won his primary race against Democratic challenger Alex Morse. Coming up, an update on whether Catholic masses are resuming around the country. Germany says it now has proof that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned with a Soviet-era chemical weapon. Germany's defense minister says that he was poisoned with Novichok, the same nerve agent used in the poisoning of a Russian spy in Britain 2 years ago. Navalny, a fierce critic of President Vladimir Putin, got sick on a plane last month, forcing the pilot to make an emergency landing. He was transferred to a hospital in Germany where doctors today confirmed the poison. He is improving, but he's still in an induced coma on a ventilator. Germany summoned the Russian ambassador to demand a full investigation, and the German chancellor that is calling the poisoning attempted murder. Britain's Prime Minister faced questions from members of Parliament for the first time in 6 weeks and said the worst of the coronavirus pandemic is over.
We have succeeded in turning the tide of this pandemic, and in spite of the negativity and the constant sniping from the opposition, we are seeing a country that is not only going back to school, but going back to work.
Boris Johnson traded barbs with Britain's opposition leader today, asking if he would admit that schools are now safe. More than 5 years after the Paris terror attack on the newspaper Charlie Hebdo, 14 people are going on trial today. 3 terrorists killed 17 people in January of 2015, sparking an outpouring of public support for the newspaper that printed cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Both ISIS and al-Qaeda claimed responsibility. The attackers were killed, and today the trial begins for 14 of their relatives and supporters. In Iraq today, French President Emmanuel Macron held a press conference with Iraq's president and reaffirmed his country's commitment to fight ISIS. Macron is the first world leader to visit Baghdad since the new government was formed in May. Hong Kong democracy activist Nathan Law is speaking out from Berlin. He is calling for a new approach in dealing with China.
We have trade deal with them, which we will have. We can stick it with human rights clauses that we demand actions from the Chinese government to address the problems in the Uyghur concentration camp in Xinjiang, also the human rights violation in Hong Kong.
Law told journalists at a news conference in Germany that Western countries need to change their strategy with China. He flew to Germany in July after China implemented the new national security law. The leader of the diocese in Hong Kong is warning priests to watch their language in homilies. Cardinal John Tong Han wrote a letter telling priests to avoid politics. He also told them to avoid preaching, quote, offensive expressions. His warning follows a crackdown on free expression in Hong Kong. Belarus has been the site of unrest following a contested presidential election. The archbishop from the country's capital was not allowed to return home earlier this week following his trip to Poland, and his case is now drawing worldwide attention. Even U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrote on Twitter, quote, the archbishop and the Belarusian people must be allowed to exercise their fundamental freedoms, including freedom to worship. In an interview with EWTN News Nightly today, the archbishop tells us why he was in Poland.
Well, I was in Poland for several celebrations. I was invited previously, and coming back home 2 days ago, I wasn't allowed to enter to Belarus without any explanation why, what happened. It never happened in my life. I'm more than 30 years a bishop. I used to travel a lot, visited many countries, and I was very much surprised.
The archbishop says that he has written a letter to lawmakers in Belarus asking when he can return home. He is still waiting for an answer. In the meantime, he says the church is heavily involved in bringing peace to Belarus.
The Catholic Church also organized several prayers, and especially 2 weeks ago, when the Council of Bishops of Europe proposed to all Christians of Europe to say together prayer Our Father at the same time. We organized a very big prayer in one of Minsk churches.
The archbishop says he's especially praying to the patron of Belarus, St. Michael the Archangel. Up next, Pope Francis holds his weekly talk at the Vatican in front of pilgrims for the first time since the pandemic began. Catholics living in Wisconsin will once again be required to go to Mass on Sunday, provided that they're healthy and not at risk for the coronavirus. A statement from the Wisconsin Catholic Conference says that the bishops are, quote, enthusiastic about the return of in-person Mass and the Eucharist. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with more. Mark?
Eric, as you know, Catholics are obliged to attend Sunday Mass, but COVID-19 changed that. All over the country, bishops lifted the obligation due to health concerns. Now, bishops in Wisconsin will soon announce when the dispensation from going to Mass will expire. The Wisconsin Catholic Bishops' Conference writes, "It is with elation that the bishops of Wisconsin have announced plans to end the dispensation from the Sunday Mass obligation in September 2020. I asked the executive director of the Wisconsin Catholic Conference, Kim Verkotterin, to address some of the health concerns.
Folks need to be able to kind of assess, based on their personal situation, whether it's safe for them to return to Mass.
The bishops say measures are in place to promote and preserve the safety of those attending public Mass.
We want people to feel safe when they come to church, and we want them to be safe.
Father John Garotti in the Diocese of Green Bay tells me the return of the Sunday obligation doesn't mean the removal of safety measures.
There's a cleaning protocol, there's temperature taking, there's urging to wear masks. In our state of Wisconsin, we're required actually to wear masks in public places.
Now, it's up to each diocese in Wisconsin to provide clarification on when the obligation may be excused due to illness or other concerns. So far, only the Archdiocese of Milwaukee has announced the dispensation from Sunday Mass will expire on September 14th. Last month, Sioux Falls in South Dakota became the first diocese in the U.S. to lift the general dispensation seen in the wake of the pandemic. Father Garotti describes how participating in Mass is fundamental to the faith.
It's at the heart of what it means to be Catholic. And to remind people of the obligation, but to not simply dwell on the word obligation, but to say that this is something we do out of love as disciples of the Lord Jesus.
At this point, outside of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, the other Wisconsin dioceses do not have set dates to lift the dispensation from Mass, but I'm told they are all working on their plans to go into effect this month, Eric.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting tonight. Thanks a lot, Mark. Well, finally tonight, Pope Francis welcomes pilgrims to his weekly talk at the Vatican for the first time since the coronavirus lockdown. And he says there's a chance that the church could emerge stronger from the pandemic.
Diversità e solidarietà uniti in armonia. Questa è la strada.
The Holy Father says the key is to show unity. It's more than just helping others a few times a day. Instead, placing others' needs ahead of our own, a good way to go through life. Pope Francis also asked those in attendance to pray for the people of Lebanon. Well, we want to thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Eric Rosales. We leave you tonight with another look at the Holy Father's weekly address with pilgrims in attendance for the first time in months. Have a great night and God bless.